Feel free to pause me if you have any questions and let me know if you're using this feature already or if you have any questions in order to use the feature going forward. Again, my name is Ruchika Mogha, and I'm the CPA in the Switching Engineering Department of Nakisa. We'll be presenting you today's session. So we can perform what is mass modification. So basically, if a user wants to do an lease modification on multiple contracts at the same time, the option now available is that you can have it run on multiple leases, multiple contracts at the same time. The user can do it on the UI on the front end one at a time, but this feature will save the time and increase chances of making decrease the chances of making errors when doing on the UI, so that it matches all the contracts if multiple contracts need to have the same modification applied. So as I mentioned here, the benefits are that you'll be able to update multiple contracts in bulk. You will have less manual errors and you will save time. So if you have 20 contracts, a user cannot go and run it 20 times to modify the contract changes. So process a mass modification job. And we'll start with it. In doing so, we can start with the topic of who can perform a mass modification job. So we have permission matrix where the roles are assigned to all the users, and have a new role that was that came out in the last release, which was only the mass modification. So in previous versions, we had batch user, which basically gave the user to run all the mass workflows that we have under the batch management. And now we have come out with the mass modification, whereby a user, if just has to run a mass modification job under batch management, they will have the option to be assigned just that one role. So if I come on the UI for 1 minute, I can show you quickly. In our main menu, we have batch management. So the original role that was assigned was only batch management. And now we have split the role. So currently there are 4 roles available for batch management. The one that has all the roles for operational posting, indexation, mass workflow, and mass modification, and the batch management. So the users or the companies don't have to change their SSOs in order to to adapt to this new option that's available now if their processes have not changed. So if your process, you want to change it or you want to apply it, you can, but you don't have to. So going back to the slide is that you can use the batch user role, and only that role plus the mass modification role assigned to the user will give the capability of running the mass modification jobs. So a mass modification job can be, as I showed you, can be done through our main menu, coming to the mass batch management under mass modification. And before you were able to run the mass modification job, you will have to create a profile like any other batch management task. You can create a profile by entering a name. You can drill down filters, or if not required, you don't have to, you can leave it at all. And if you do, you can drill down by clicking on the arrow here and you can have list and you can assign yourselves the profile that you want to create for a particular company or a business unit. And this can be reused in the future. You don't have to recreate it every time, or you can modify it if required. So which terms can you modify in mass modification? So not all the terms or can be done, or also in the way that we can process them. So for example, at the lease component level, you can just add or edit the terms and conditions. You cannot delete any terms yet. In the activation group, user can change the contract rate. You can modify certain fields and perform reassessments of existing terms, as well as you can have units where you can modify the cost center allocation for multiple units in multiple activation group all at once. So again, drilling down for the activation group modifications, you can also have the option of adding and modifying the indexation type from changing to none to CPI or vice versa. You have these three options that you can modify your type of CPI indexation. So this is an example of if you want to run the lease component and activation together. Just to keep a note that you cannot run unit cost object modification or change the cost center allocation mass job all together at the same time. So you need to run it separately. This will be a separate job completely. So the process of running the mass modification for the LC and the AG, which is the lease component and activation group together, user has to keep in mind that the modification will first be done at the lease component level, and then it will be applied to the activation group. But also needs to be noted that if by any chance, for some reason, that lease component job task is failed, then the related activation group modification will also be skipped. And if the activation is completed or the job is completed for the lease component, it may still fail for activation group for many reasons. I'll go through some examples here. So first thing also I would like to bring attention to is that if you have any term on the lease component that is already exercised, you will not be able to modify it using a mass modification. So what will happen is when you will actually try to attempt modifying it, the user can download it. And what will happen is they will see that there is an empty tab for the lease component. For terms and conditions tab will be empty. So user can only see the terms that are editable in the Excel template when you download it. So let me show you how we can see on the UI. So when you are creating a mass modification, you can assign lessee as a principal position example today. And then you have selected here, in this case, lease component and activation group same time. Then you have assign a name to your event. The lease component event can be named different from the activation group event. So you can assign the name you need to. Next step, which a user has to input is the modification dates. So here we see that three options are available for modification date, which is next available posting date, job date means today's date, or user defined date if you want to put in a different date than, for example, an open period that you may have. And similarly, you have to assign the same for the activation date type. Any questions so far before I proceed to the next slide? No, no questions? No problem. And feel free to put it in the chat if you don't want to unmute yourself. That's also okay. We can go through that and answer your questions. Next is mass modification. As I mentioned, you can apply indexation and you can also change it, or you can leave it in the same current state that it is. Next is exercise button, which is right here. You can apply exercise to all your terms and conditions, or you can leave it in the current state. Another option here is, which I didn't write in the text, is contract rate change. You have the option to do a mass update of your contract rates. If you want to select IBR or contract rate, would you want to assign a number here? So again, this is a snippet of what the sections that you have to input before you can actually click add, and the solution will generate an Excel schedule. So let's see how it looks. Click on the creating the job. on the right-hand side, we have the modification task that pops up of your screen, which will give you a message saying pending user input, because what it requires now is on the left-hand side of our screen. When I show you on the UI, you will see we have a modification job where you have an Excel file, which will be populated for you with all the inputs that you have just entered in the previous slide. Also, we have this IA, which means basically you can view the inputs that you have done also by clicking it. So I'll show you an example of that. Maybe I can just go on the UI and show you. That gives you an idea. So I come on the main menu, in my batch management, mass modification, jobs, right here. So if you look on the left-hand side that I was mentioning on the slide, is that once you have entered your inputs for the mass modification job to run, you can open this eye to give you this view of all the inputs that you've already entered. And then you can see what was your input. And once the job is created, the pending user input, next step is you will be able to download the template with the required inputs entered to do the modifications. So that's how this icon looks, the blue color icon shown below. Once you download the template, you will see that there are these different fields and tabs that you can upload and update. So let me go through that on the slide. There's a combination, there's a blue columns that are, so basically these are color-coded columns that you will see on the different tabs that you'll be downloading. So the mandatory ones are the yellow one, the red ones, the yellow is optional, the gray is also optional, and the blue is the combination of the fields uniquely identified objects. Note that there is more than one row with the same set of identifying blue values that you have. So only the last one is applied. Next is you have to include the true and exclude column, which I can show you on the Excel, which basically means if you include true, the mass modification will apply. And if you include as exclude, it can be on the Excel modification template, but it will not be running the job on it. The operation means you have three different operations that you can do in the mass modification. You can create a new term. You can update an existing term. And exported means it will be completely ignored when you run it on the import. So once the user has updated this information, means adding new terms or modifying new terms, you will be able to upload the blue icon, the purple icon here is to now the option giving you to upload your modified adjustments that you would like, the modifications that you like to have in that Excel, and you can upload your file here. Before you actually upload the file, while it's downloading, you do have the option of canceling it. And when you click on cancel, keep in mind that it will only delete the drafts that were successfully created or merged. It will only delete the drafts. So it will only delete the drafts that have not been completed, but the ones that have been completed, it cannot be changed. So next would be that once you have uploaded the file, it takes a certain time to run the task. I'll show you when I do on the live that there's a queue that happens, and then when your job gets started, it notifies you it has started. Once it's completed, the view of the screen is something like this, what you see on screen now. On the left-hand side, you have the modification job saying when it's completed. And on the right-hand side is the task itself. So you have different columns whereby you will be notified that the number of rows that you have entered for each of the objects, if they have been processed, completed, failed, canceled, or skipped. So it depends on the results, where do the different number of objects fall under once the mass modification is completed. So points to note. I'll go through these points once I will also show you on the UI. So let's go on the UI and see what I have done as a few of the examples already. Start with this one, and I'll open it on the UI to show the contract itself. So this is test case 1, and what I have requested here, I have said that I would like to change at the activation group level and the LC. This is an example when someone is trying to modify, do a mass modification on a contract where there was only one term, or you may have multiple terms, but all the terms have already been exercised. So what is going to happen when you create a job like this, or one of the contracts will be like this in the sense that all the terms are exercised of the lease. So this was the requirement that I did. And if I to show you on the UI right here, test case number 1, taken, yes. And I can show you that on my activation group, I have an active contract and I have only one term, and this term is already exercised. So as I said, you cannot modify any lease component terms once it has already been exercised. So I only have one. And if I have put in the input that I would like to modify this, I cannot do any modification on the lease component. It will show me an empty tab. So what does it mean? I had already uploaded, I had already started my my job, mass modification job, so I can download and show it to you. I have a copy saved right here. This is what I saw when I had downloaded my file. So what do I see? I see I have my test case 1, and I have assigned it a name. And these are the different columns that I had mentioned that we will, different color coded columns that we will see. And I want to just jump on to the tab for lease component terms and conditions, because before I start making any modifications, I like to see the terms there that I would like to modify. Because in this case, I don't want to add, I just want to modify. But you cannot modify, as I said, any lease component term which already has an activation group which is exercised. So when you do this, you will be seeing an empty file right here. So that was just an example to show you that. Any questions on that? I'll go through the next example. So in this next example, what do I like to do? I like to show you that I'm running just the lease component modification. And I have selected my one contract, that's test case 7, and I have a few terms. So I would like to add one term, and I like to skip another term that is already under the same contract. So let's look at test. Under test case 7, I have 2 lease components. So in this example, both of them are active. And as I mentioned, I requested the mass modification job to export the extract, and I want to run the lease component modification on it. So I had already downloaded the file. I can show you what happens there. Now I have a lease component where I want to do where I want to add. Here, let me see. Yes. Okay. So I have this first tab, which is a lease component. It shows me the two LCs or the lease components I have downloaded. I'm gonna include this for now, the one that ends with 509 as true, because I would like to exclude this in modification. The red is obligatory, the display ID is already assigned, and the yellow tabs, as we had mentioned, that they are not mandatory to change. So I'm not going to change anything in this tab. The next tab I like to do is, as I said, I like to bring in additional terms. So as I mentioned, these terms, I'm going to leave it as is. I'm not going to change. And I'm going to I'm going to copy this term that I have for the one LC I like to do a modification for. So in this one, I will create update since I like to create this term. Next, I like to assign an Excel ID. This must be a unique ID if you're creating a new one. I will leave the display lease component display ID as same because I like to create it under the same lease component. I'm not changing the currency. I'm changing the payment term, and I can add a supplemental. So in this case, I am adding a supplemental. Amount frequency, I'm leaving it the same as one time. I'm adding $5,000, and I will change the terms. As you see, it's from 2024 to 2025, 2 years. So I can add the first payment date as, say, for example, from 2025, June 2025. I like to have additional $5,000. And I will leave. So these columns that are in red, they're all mandatory. So I have completed this section. And on the right, we also have payment timing, which is start of the day. And I'm leaving the grays columns as is because I don't want to do any change on that. But if required, you can change it if your term has escalating rent or you want to change your first and last payment date. So in this example, I just showed you that I have added a term, and I will simply save the file, and I will
Why would
upload
you
it.
leave the first row as update if you're not changing it? Or row 2 on the spreadsheet. If you're not changing anything, why leave it as update?
Thank you for your question, Bruce. Are you talking about this one?
Yeah. Like
Uh,
nothing's changed on there, right? But it sounds like you're telling the system to update it, but that's what it is. There's nothing to update.
I could leave it either way because I did not make any changes. So there's no, because when you're exporting it, it assumes that you might have to make any changes on it. And since I have not made any change on the term itself, it's not going to have any impact per se.
System doesn't do any, it sees update and it ignores it.
Exactly, because the terms have not been changed whatsoever. I did not touch any of these columns in this particular rows.
Okay.
So I can close this and just want to make sure I'm the right one. It's test case 7. I can upload it by clicking on the purple icon and look for my test case 7. Import. So as I was mentioning before, that once you start this, I'm in the wrong one, this one. Once you upload the file, this system starts to say scheduled to perform the task. But keep in mind that with a new next gen, since we have so many microservices, things, tasks and jobs are queued. So your job has not started just because you have uploaded a file. So once it gets its turn on the queue, then it will commence the job of running the modification itself. So I'm gonna just wait a couple of minutes while it's gonna get in the queue and get started. I'll hop on to the next example that I have, and we can always come back to it and see what happens. So right now we are scheduled to run two rows that we have. So once it starts to commence the job, we'll have more information on the action icon and the show report right here. If nobody has a question, I can jump on to the next example.
I have a question.
Sure.
Is there any specific cases where you run the lease component modification, AG component modification together, or is that just user preference?
It's user preference. So I have done multiple examples. I've done an example. In this case, I showed just the lease component. We only did the lease component. We didn't want to bring in the activation yet because somebody just wants to bring in the terms and not activating them. Then I have an example right here where I have done just the activation, means we already have the lease component terms added and now you want to exercise them, right? So this is an example of that where I have said I like to do modification on the activation group. Again, given also an example that you can bring in multiple AGs, since if you want to bring in contracts, you can skip an AG, you can only modify one AG, and further you can exercise the terms that are already entered. So in that case, I only want an activation modification, right? An AG modification, I mean. Then another example I have is here where I'm doing both. I am adding a termination option in the activation and the lease component at the same time. So there can be various scenarios where your modification requirements are different, right? So in this example, I'm running a modification for both. Another example I have here, I'm running the modification just on the activation group. So it's again, as I mentioned, it's as required by the case by case. Does that answer your question, Shivani?
Yes, clear. Thank you.
While we're on
Okay.
this screen,
Go ahead.
yeah, I just wanted to make a comment because you kind of passed by the use IBR quickly and the effective date that it's using when it's pulling from the master data, the IBR rates. So in this situation, it would be using the effective date as specified in the modification date column.
That is correct.
Just wanted people to understand that it's not based on the posting date, it's based on the modification date, the IBR that's used.
Right. Thank you, Bruce, for the comment. I'm going to go back and see if my modification job is complete. Okay, so in this case, as I had expected, as I said, my expectation was I was skipping one and I was going to have one completed. So let's see. So in this example, I see that, okay, so this is a good example where I have actually used, I had selected my contract to have the generate vendor invoice selected, but I did not provide the vendor payment. So that is why my lease component got failed. And this is the one that I had skipped, and this is the one I have failed. So what does it mean? Fail, this is a nice error that I want to see, is that if I come on the definition page, right here in the accounting page, I had selected generate vendor invoice. And if I go back and open my tab, this is the Excel file that I uploaded. And when I added this term, I did not specify my split on here. . So I should have added another line here and assigned my vendor payments ID. So even though it's the same, you will have to come and copy it and you have to bring it in order to make sure that you have given all the information. What I should have done is this, give it any it has to come from here, lease component term ID, which you're adding here. You bring it here and you add it so it can link it. And this is what I should have completed in order to not have an error there. So next would be to cover this one. It's an activation group modification. I have also downloaded this already, so let's go into test case 4. What I have, just the activation group. So in this example, I have 3 terms. I have the first term, the base rent, which I've activated for 2 years. It's a $2,000 base rent. I also added these 2 additional terms. This is out of the range, but it has not been exercised. So I like to exercise my fixed rent now using the mass modification. So if I go back here and download my Excel file, give me a second. So this is what I have. So I downloaded the file and I'm saying this is the activation group we just saw, skip 1 and activate 1, exercise 1, or reasonable certainty that you'll exercise it. When I downloaded, I have changed, this was actually false. So I changed it to true because I want to make my $200 term exercised. So if I go back here for 1 second, sorry, I have assigned the date of June 1st, 2024. So my modification date is June 1st, 2024. Okay, so I will close this. Bear with me 1 second. Yeah. I'm looking at my terms. I would like to import my Excel file now. This one, test case 4. Sorry, while it's importing, I will just like to remind one more time, just to show you that I left the second term as false. So I did not make any changes. So even though it says update, because initially these 2 were false, so I'm just updating the term with the $200 value for fixed rent parking, and I'm not changing this. So again, going back to what was mentioned recently, ask the question why update. System will see that you have not made any changes, so it's not going to have any financial impact there. So we'll come back here and we'll see if the job has started. It is still in queue. Any questions on that? For just the activation group, we want to see that term is exercised, and we will also see that the second term of the base rent will not be exercised, will be left as is. No questions on that? Next one I like to cover is, I was mentioning before, is add a termination option both in the lease component and the activation at the same time. And I'm doing it on June 1st, 2025. And There's no indexation, so we leave it as is, and I like to exercise all the terms. So I have selected my test case true for that. You can drill down from here, test case 2. It does not have a termination option. So I do have a purchase option. No, that's not exercised. I have a supplemental, and I have a base rent of $15,000. So going back, well, I have already downloaded the file. It's true. So in this case, when I downloaded the file, I already have these two terms on the lease component terms and conditions. And the reason why I only have 2 and not 3, it's because I have exercised one option. So if I just want to come back and show you on the UI that actually I have, this is test case 2. Yeah, so I have 3 terms that are on the activation group. And on the lease component, I should normally see 3 terms, right? But we will not, as I mentioned initially in the first thing, is that we cannot modify a term that has already been exercised at the activation group. We cannot change that at the LC level. So I just want to reemphasize on that. So that's why we only see 2 terms here, because these 2 terms are not exercised. So when I downloaded the file, I only had 2 rows here. I added my 3rd row for creating my payment term for termination. And then I have included all the required information for running this modification, which is I have termination option. That means amount frequency 1 time. You may or may not have a termination amount. I have input 1,000. You may have a $0 value. That's also fine. Payment frequency to keep in mind, it's going to be 1 time. And I am running the termination for July 1st. And it's a 1-time payment calculation. And I'm leaving the advance payment mode as advance. The payment timing has to be start of the day, so we have included so. And I have not included any other information for the other remaining tabs. So I want to bring attention to the Excel ID. So I want to link this to my activation group now. I would like to create the same term. So I have this 4, 5, 6, 7 and lease component. So I'll jump straight to my terms and conditions of the activation group. And just to remind you, I use the same Excel ID 4567 coming from the lease component. So this is to make sure that this is related to the lease component gets linked. Next, it's the same term, and I'm leaving as true. I would like to exercise the termination option. And I will make sure that the other terms are at false. So I am not changing anything here. So I will change these to true, because when we had exported the file, we were saying we would like to exercise all the options, but you do have the option of changing it. So I am going to change and say I don't want to exercise them, and I can leave maybe one of them as true. Any questions on when you're modifying lease component and EG at the same time, adding a new term? Yes, Bruce?
Yeah, sorry for the coughing. I got a bit of a cold. So yeah, I just wanted to point out that for some of the new people in the company, when we say exercising the purchase option, we're not truly exercising the purchase option. What this use case is where we've entered in a purchase option in the contract that was not reasonably certain. And at a later date, we assessed it to be reasonably certain, which is different from the act of exercising a purchase contract where you're actually executing the documentation to buy out the lease. It's just a terminology thing that I think we need to improve on. I think everybody at Nakisa understands that, but I know it causes some confusion for some new people. It's an important distinction. Go ahead, Ruchika, sorry.
Thank you for emphasizing that. But I'm going to leave my purchase option as false. Leave it at false and only running a supplemental, and would like to add the term for termination option. So I'm just terminating adding that option here. So I can save this, and then I will make sure that I import it in my UI, which is right. Oops, it's right here. And I'll make sure it's the correct one since I have many. Plus icon. Take my file in, which will bring my mass modification job in queue. Okay. So at this point, we can see that my termination option was, my last modification was completed. It got started after a minute. I had commenced it on queue, and let's see what happened. It says it's done, and let's go in the detail what I had requested. So basically, I had selected one term in the activation to be reasonable certainty to be exercised at this point, and skip the other one because I was not going to exercise it. And we can go and see the term. So it was test case 4 before we hop on to the next one. And see what happened. We see orange color. Basically, what that means is my initial inception term is now revised since I have done a mass modification and I have a new active term. So if I come on terms and conditions, we see that my fixed rent parking is now exercised. I have an active contract and my schedules will be updated as well. So I have run the modification on 1st of June, and I have my change in the payment term. So now I have, instead of 2,000, I have 2,200. Any question on the mass modification of this term, where I left one as false? I did not modify it or likely or reasonable certainty or likely to exercise it. And just the fixed parking was exercised. Questions on that? Okay, so I'm curious to see if my test 2 is modification is complete or yet it is still in process. Oh, it's done. So let's go back and see what I had a question in this one. In this one, as I just did was add an option, a termination option in both the LC and the AG. And let's go and see what happened here. Here. This was my original terms for the lease component. And I have added the purchase option, which it does show here, but in the active, I have a termination option. Sorry, that's what I was saying. So we had a purchase, we had 3 options originally. Now we added a termination option, and we can see that the system automatically activated the contract, LC as well. And now we are the activation group. And we have the terms that are right here, the termination option. So that's that. Let's go on the next one since we don't have much time left. Next one is activation. So yeah, this is to show you an example that how if an activation group modification is requested, whereby a contract rate change, I had requested for a contract rate change, and this actually would not have happened because if you have a posted journal entry already in that period, the modification will not happen. So I have downloaded the file already. It's multiple CFS. I could run it and show you. Um, I can't find the file, but I can show you on the PowerPoint basically what's going to happen as well when we have this case, as well as the case where you have completed. So if you have selected an activation group modification, and I've selected next available posting date, and I want to start my next. So in my date, I'm giving the option of next available date. That's the name I gave to my event, just to make it easier. And to show you this particular contract, what has happened is that the contract is already being posted. So in this example, 7902, 7902, bear with me. Schedules. To show you, I have this already posted the last entry as well. So when the user is doing that, if the next posting available date is normally going to be my last date now, right? So if a user has selected this modification task saying for this particular contract, use the next available posting date as a modification date, since I've already posted my last payment or last one of the last periods postings have already been posted, the system will automatically say that fail to generate the template row due to activation group does not have any available dates after the last posting is done, right? And there is no Excel being given to us so that we can do the lease modification. So we want to bring that to your attention. Another one that I would like to show is basically you can change your CPI local to CPI global, or one of the different three indexation types that we have, that's none, global, and local. You can change vice versa based on what's required using the mass modification. So in this example, if I can show quickly, 8, if it's not going to give me, I'm going to probably just copy and write the name. Give me a second. Indexation. Actually, I can show you the Excel that I have exported, but eight. Okay. So if I come on to show you quickly, accounting tab, we'll see currently this contract has in the active status, we have a CPI global. And what I'm requesting on my mass modification is that I would like to change it to CPI local to global. So you won't see the change here, obviously, because it's on my Excel file, just to show you the input. That's what I have requested here for to be earned on mass modification date on June 1st, 2023. So when I download the file, it's going to look something like this, which is in my accounting activation group accounting tab. I will see CPI local and I'll have the current index rate given to me. So the only change I'm requesting here on this modification is to change to CPI global to CPI local. And how will I do that? Is I will change this and I'll request it to be CPI global. And I have created another file for the session saying, okay, it's the very same file. I've just changed it to show you that I'm only making one modification. So I'm changing the section, even though this is great, but this is the modification I require, which is I want to bring it from CPI local to global. And this is my consumer price index category type and the reference date. So basically, it's a mimic of whatever you do on the UI itself. In order to change the indexation type, you are able to import the same thing when you are doing the mass modification job. So to run this, I will simply come here and add my file, which is CPI local to convert CPI global, and hopefully it will do the job fast. And I'm going to just go back on this. So these are the few, while it's running the job in the backend, I can show you the few examples of the results. So as I mentioned initially that if a lease component modification will fail, automatically the activation group will be skipped. So it tells you clearly that the lease component modification was not done successfully. Therefore, the AG modification has been skipped as well. Another example here is that you may have a lease component that is modification goes successfully, but it may have some field not entered input correctly or missing at the activation level, so it may still fail. So that's the second example. The third example is what I have like to show is that what I've shown you, if you have a generate vendor invoice selected or enabled, and if you have not entered the information for the vendor payment slip for the term that you just entered or added, the LC will fail and therefore the activation will be skipped. We just saw an example as well. So the lease component failed because the gender invoice was selected, but the payment details for the vendor split was not given. So this is another snippet of that. Next is last period has already been posted. So as I said, if you select the next available date and your last period is end of the term, so you will not be able to do any modification. So the system automatically will give you a generic error saying it's completed and you cannot do any lease modification. It falls in the category of failed. So back and show you if my schedule has commenced. Unfortunately, it has not. Okay, so we'll wait for a couple of minutes. We still have 3 minutes. If anybody has a question that I've not covered that they would like to ask, or they like to share that if they are already using the mass modification in our next gen already, and how is the experience? Anybody has a question or comment?
Since no questions or comments, I just wanted to, I realize this is about mass modifications and not about accounting, but for the CPAs on the phone, when you perform these mass modifications, you really need to understand what you're doing and what the expected results are from an accounting perspective and do the analysis afterwards. And modifications can get extremely complex from an accounting perspective. We've just touched on a few use cases. If you're interested, I would highly recommend, if you're really wanting to get in the weeds of modifications in accounting, I would recommend a document from Deloitte It's just called Lease Modifications, 10 Comprehensive Examples. If you can't find it, just send me an email, I'll send it to you. It's really, really good. It explains very complex scenarios with journal entries and all of the justifications, etc.
And in this example, thank you, Bruce, for sharing that. Sorry, just to cut you off, but I just want to show that I did not choose the correct. Says it failed to create a modification event due to modification date was invalid, not in the period of the term of the lease. But if that was not the case, then you would have seen the change um, in the CPI local to global, and you would have the change in the payment as well in the schedules and the journal entries. To add to what Bruce has mentioned, that we have a new feature coming up soon, and the option of seeing draft before we actually um, run the whole mass modification process completely. Since when you're running the mass modification, you don't see if you are um, financial impacts on it, right? So we always suggest that you run these mass modification in your pre-production environment before you actually run in your prod environment. And I did not have a chance to cover the cost center unit allocation change as well, but it's pretty much similar to what we have seen, that you will have to download the template, and you will be able to provide the different new allocation center for cost centers and split it and just re-upload the file in order to see the mass modification impact for that. So I'd like to thank you everyone for your time. It's 11 o'clock, and feel free to send me any questions you may have on LinkedIn or via email. I'll be happy to answer back to you. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Thanks, Ruchika.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.